Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining us today. So today we're here to talk all about the AI-powered enterprise, and we're here to talk with the author of the AI-powered enterprise, Seth Early, and my boss, and I'm really excited to talk to him today about some of the thoughts around AI readiness, some of the critical factors to get started and measure AI, and some of the things that he is seeing in the marketplace today in terms of AI capabilities and maturity. So my name is Dave Scribella. I'm a managing director and client partner here with Early Information Science. And Seth, I'll let you say hello.
Sure. I'm Seth Early. I'm still founder and CEO of Early Information Science. For those of you who know me, know a little bit about my background. Dave did mention the book, and that's one the premise of what we're talking about today is really, how do you want to think about artificial intelligence in the organization?
So before we jump into the discussion, a quick couple of notes on housekeeping. We'd like to thank our partners at CMS Wire and Marketing AI Institute for helping to sponsor and bring together the content today, and of course all of the webinars in the past several months. We are recording today's session. The session will be about 50 minutes long, and we want to save the last 10 minutes for questions and answers. So please use the Q&A function in the Zoom, and feel free to chat as well. And our moderator, Sharon, will certainly make sure we can see those questions. Your input is valued, so we have a couple of polls. We definitely appreciate you taking the time to respond to our questions, and we like to weave those into the conversation, of course, and also might follow up as appropriate. So with that, let's jump in. So our agenda, we want to talk about AI Power Enterprise is the name of a book, but also, it means something in terms of how big companies and corporations are really changing fundamentally the way they think about and do business. And of course, that's driven by an AI strategy for companies that have sort of progressed in that journey, what's working for them, and for companies that have yet to start, where to start and what needs to be developed. There are some critical underlying information and data architecture aspects and elements to successful AI. Data quality, the ontology and knowledge graph design that powers AI are something we want to talk about in more detail. Some companies are bootstrapping their AI programs, and other companies are looking for quick wins or success stories within the company. But oftentimes it's a case of how do you justify, make a case for, and continue to invest, grow, and expand your AI program, and what's the ROI associated there. And we want to talk a little bit more tactically about where you are in the journey, and of course, at any point in the journey, there's always room for enhancement, improvement, and we want to walk through certainly and get a perspective from Seth on that. So today, we're going to help you think through the formula for AI success, demystify the topic. A lot of times in our experience, data scientists, technical and software engineers understand really what they want and what their view of AI progress and evolution looks like, but executives in a lot of big companies kind of get it, but still don't really get it or can't apply it to their specific priorities and needs inside the organization. And we hope to leave you with a couple of solutions for focusing on business goals and thinking about how AI ties to classic business strategy and benefit. Also thinking about the semantic data layer and the enterprise information architecture. As Seth will say, there's no AI without IA. And leave you with some idea on metrics, how to think about measuring your program and supporting that ROI, because when you make that initial investment, it's based on some promise, and where do you go from there? Okay, so business readiness for AI, 75% of business leaders feel that they will be out of business in 5 years if they can't figure out how to scale AI. And that's a direct quote from an Accenture study. I think that's very true, whether you're talking about automation, recommendations, basically delivering capabilities and an experience that consumers, both in a B2B and B2C context, are growing more and more to expect. in their daily lives and interactions with your businesses every day. I think leaders understand that this is important. But 92% believe that they haven't comprehensively mapped out the opportunities for AI adoption. So AI might be, there might be a success story in one pocket of a large company, but not necessarily the entire company.
And just to add flavor to that, Dave, I think it really is existential for organizations. I mean, we have seen situations where, people have not anticipated changes in technology. And, there's a story I tell about a publisher in the K through 12 textbook space that was losing market share to a competitor that was beating them to market by several months. And after some research, we found that that competitor was actually, and this is many, many years ago, but they were using a component authoring environment where they could put together the textbook drafts very, very quickly, because there's so much variation according to state and local standards. And even with state standards, it's still highly variable and highly custom. And when the CEO learned that, he said, well, why don't we have that? And the team said, well, that's the project we've been trying to get funded for the last 3 years. And I would keep kicking it down the road. He goes, well, let's do it now. How long will it take? And the team said, oh, it's going to be about a year, and our competitors will still keep moving forward. And in fact, it was too late. They lost that market. They were not able to catch up. And so I think that there's similar things that are happening today, especially in the cognitive AI space, where people are going to be caught flat-footed, and it will really be existential. So this figure, I don't think is an exaggeration.
So it seems like everybody in large enterprises is doing some level of investment in AI and machine learning, and that there is clearly opportunity from a vendor perspective. But I think at the same time, right, you've got sort of a failure to adopt or a failure to launch at enterprise scale, right? So when you think about widespread production or really being able to move AI as a capability across a large enterprise, there's something in the way. And we know there's a lot of factors, but one of them is data quality. So, we want to talk about the AI power enterprise and really, what is it, right? Because there's a landscape of products and tools out there to support a lot of different aspects of an AI program. This is courtesy of a landscape that was produced last December, I believe. And it really just, like marketing technology 6 or 7 years ago, where maybe, a few years prior, there was a small set of tools available to the marketplace. All of a sudden, things explode. And now, there are semantic modeling tools and knowledge graph tools and a variety of data science and data ops toolkits everywhere. And companies are adopting or implementing them at different speeds and with different levels of variety and consistency. So, maybe Seth, just to start, if you could sort of frame up large company, pick any industry, what sort of gives them the right to say they are powering their enterprise through AI?
Well, what's interesting about this kind of a graphic is, number one, I can't really read the categories very well, but you can see that there's just this enormous number of tools and technologies. And the way they classifications, I like to say hierarchies are for humans, right? And the classification is to help us make decisions. And many times if you say, well, I need an AI infrastructure tool, well, that doesn't really help. Or an AI analytics tool, does that help? Does that help you make a decision? It really doesn't. And, this is the MAD landscape, the machine, AI, and data landscape. And again, it's how do you make decisions based on this kind of a graphic? The graphic serves to maybe sow confusion, fear, uncertainty, doubt, right? And say, oh, you really need to figure this out with, expertise. But, I like to say, the first rule of AI is forget about AI, right? This is really to focus on the business problem and to start looking at the processes that you need to enable and look at the bottlenecks in those processes. But, we can still look at AI and say, well, what are the things it can do, right? What are the broad tasks that you can accomplish with AI? And it's from automation of tasks and repeatable tasks robotic process automation is something we've heard about, reducing human intervention on routine things, getting rid of administrative work. So that's automation of tasks. And then there's analysis of patterns, right? When we look at the data, our predictive analytics, looking at different types of trends and anomalies, looking at customers that are going to defect or fraud in certain types of financial transactions, or problems with employee attrition that you can predict. You can predict churn. You can identify problems. You can look at things like predictive maintenance. Right? There's all sorts of interesting things that you can do by looking at the data and looking at the patterns in that data, and looking at very large amounts of data and trying to find those different insights and those different variables around, say, customer interactions, right? How do we kind of predict what a customer wants? How do we, personalize our interactions? How do we anticipate their needs? How do we make a product recommendation, right? So these are kind of broad brushstrokes, right? When we're looking at the data intensive machine learning types of tasks, is recognizing patterns, identifying patterns, making predictions about those patterns. And again, there's a lot of different ramifications to that. And then we get to the cognitive side of things, right? What is cognitive AI? Well, it's really reducing the cognitive load on the human. And when you start thinking about that, that's what AI, that's what all sorts of information management and usability projects try to do, right? They try to make it easier for humans to make decisions, right? And reducing the cognitive load means anticipate what I want and give it to me, right? Usability, anticipate what I want and give it to me, right? Digital transformations are about removing friction in these processes. So, when you think about cognitive AI, it's not cognitive because the systems think, right? That's a misnomer. There's no thinking, but it's to reduce the cognitive load on the human by understanding what they need, by anticipating what they need, by taking signals from those interactions and making some kind of prediction. And really what we're trying to do is we're trying to accelerate productivity, right? We're in all of these things, whether they are cognitive applications or pattern recognition applications, leverage a knowledge architecture. And when I say that, that means that we're trying to build out a structure that allows humans to be able to make decisions and apply whatever those insights are. We're not going to get into deep knowledge architecture today. We have plenty of other sessions on that and plenty of other webinars. But the point here is that we need to structure the information so that we can apply an insight. One of the arguments sometimes is that, well, some machine learning doesn't really need a knowledge architecture. Like if you're doing visual parts identification and you're on a production line and you just need to identify defective parts. Well, all you need is training data that identifies, that says, well, here's what good parts look like and here's what bad parts look like. And you don't need a knowledge architecture for that. You need labeled data to say good part, bad part. However, what do you do with the insight from that, right? What do you do? What product line was it? What manufacturing process? What were the supplies that were involved? What's that supply chain issue? What about the processes themselves? How do I remediate? Who's going to be responsible? What procedures need to be changed? How does that all feed into that process? So many times we will have machine learning applications that'll throw off data and throw off insights. But if we don't have the ability to contextualize those insights and to apply that data to solve the problem, and usually humans are involved with that, then we can't leverage it. So part of this is saying all of these things need some mechanism to make the information more readily accessible to a human. And when we're talking about cognitive applications, that's part of that as well. Dave, I have another slide that talks about the information continuum, but I don't want to ramble on here about that. But my point is to say, when we're trying to build our AI-powered processes, we're trying to understand the business process that needs to be enabled. And we're trying to understand where in that process we will have some friction. Actually, I can stop sharing my screen for a little bit. Where in the process we're going to have some friction, and then how we can enable that or how we can enhance that. Machine learning and AI does not take on an entirely an entire process from end to end, right? It's an intervention about specific steps in that process. What can you speed up? What can you automate? Where can you make it easier for the human to do their job and apply their judgment? And so when we think about this throughout the organization, we're trying to speed up information flows throughout the entire enterprise. And machine learning and AI are tools in our toolkit. We still need to make sure that we understand the process because, we can't automate what we don't understand, and we can't automate a mess, right? So starting off with the processes and the business processes and the business problems, and then looking at those interventions as to where can I enhance that process? Where can I make a human more efficient? Where can I speed up an information flow? Where can I reduce a bottleneck? Where can I fill in where I don't have accurate or sufficient information? Those are the things that we're trying to do when we build an AI-powered organization. It's that enhancement of all of those different processes.
So if I had to think about it this way, every company, whether they're in the business of selling toilet paper or high-end consulting services, has a value chain, right? They have to develop their offerings. They have to think about sales and marketing. They then have to deliver them or sell them into the marketplace and support them. If you think about that value chain, how much of that has to be AI powered to truly be AI powered? Is it really just kind of picking your spots and depending where your focuses are?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's part of it is saying, what is our competitive differentiator? Where are we providing value for the customer? And then how can we improve the ability to provide that value more efficiently or faster or in a way that differentiates us, right? So for example, customer service is an area of focus, right? Because I just read an article in the Wall Street Journal about how it's impossible to get customer support at Facebook. Like they just don't even have a customer support organization, which is kind of astounding when you think about it. But, at the end of the day, we can't quite digitize everything, right? You still will need a human, and you still need people to talk to. You still need to be able to engage, humans, machines can automate, humans can engage. And so what we need to understand is, well, how are we producing value for our customers? And what is the best way to bring that value to market? And then where are the inefficiencies in doing so, right? So if it takes a long time to do product onboarding because we have, cumbersome data operations, or we don't have the ability to do, classify our products, and we have a large number of those products, well, maybe that's the place where you can provide some efficiency and some effectiveness. If we're saying that, we have a large number of support calls that are coming through and that we have long time per incident and our customer support costs are high, and that's an important part of your value proposition, well, that may be an area to start to focus on to say, okay, how can we enhance that experience and how can we reduce the number of calls that are coming through to our call center, right? Because why do people call the call center in the first place? Because something's broken, right? Something's not working.
Not to say hi.
Not to say hi. Well, actually, apparently some people do call to say hi. I understand that is a class of calls where people are lonely. Here, talk to the bot. But the point here is that, we're trying to accomplish something. And the question is, why can't we accomplish that? And are there other mechanisms that we can build that will get that information in the hands of the user, that will answer their question more readily? Is there a reason why they have to pick up the phone and call somebody? And, many times it's because we're not thinking about our content and our information in the right way to support a customer. And a quick example I have is I was trying to get my credit card activated, and I lost the little sticker. I took the sticker off and I just threw it away. And I was like, oh, that's the number I have to call. Well, I tried to find that number, and I tried a bot, and it gave me pages and pages and pages of content about about your credit card, about security in your credit card and your account management in your credit card and your rewards program in your credit card. Where is the damn number to activate the credit card? And I kept saying, activate credit card, turn on credit card. I asked all these things and I couldn't get that information. Why is that? because nobody thought about that use case and that process and that specific piece of content that I needed in that context and that task. And that is a problem that AI could help solve, but it really is more about the IA. It is more about the information architecture. What information is needed at that point in the process, and how do I get it to that user? And so, when we're looking at these processes, when looking at digital transformations, we're trying to take, manual processes out of the picture, right? We're trying to make it much more seamless, or trying to streamline things. We're trying to take out, unnecessary activities or non-value producing activities. And so in order to do that, again, we have to say, well, why do we have that call center? Why are people calling? Where are they getting that information? What does the call center operator do when they do get somebody on the phone? Do they simply point them to a page? Well, why couldn't they get to that page, right? And so it really comes down to deconstructing those use cases, deconstructing that customer experience, doing that journey modeling and that journey mapping, and then trying to understand what that customer needs at each stage of that journey. Because think about it, a customer journey is a knowledge journey, right? They're trying to find answers, they're trying to find products, they're trying to find solutions, they're trying to find, the things that they need. And when they can't find that, what do? Well, they either bounce out and go somewhere else, or they pick up the phone, or they give up, right? In any of those cases, there's a cost to that, right? There's an opportunity cost or an actual cost. And so what we're trying to understand is, how do we bring that value to the market? How do we bring it to our customers? How do we engage with them? And that really has to become a competitive advantage, right? That has to be part of your differentiator, how you're serving that customer. Even if you're a low-cost provider, you better remove that friction from the process, right? Because you need it. Because if you're a low-cost provider and it's like, how low can you go? Well, you need to remove that friction from the process. If you're basing yourself, your value proposition on high levels of customer service, well, that you better be able to provide that customer service at a lower cost. So when you start looking at, organizations that are trying to be AI powered, what you're really trying to do is you're trying to speed up the information metabolism of the organization. You're trying to make it easier for everybody up and down that food chain to get the information they need so that they can do their job and they can produce information that's going to be the input for the next stage of the process and ultimately for the customer. So, these are tools in your toolkit, but it comes back to the business basics. It comes back to the processes and the value proposition. And it comes back to, how are your technologies serving your processes? How are you serving your organization? And then how do you make sure that those technologies are working as efficiently as possible based on the data that they run on, right? And so when we don't have the right data, then those tools won't work effectively. They're going to be anomalies. They're going to fail, and they're not going to produce value.
So I want to put a pin on the data and the information architecture. Come right back to that. So it sounds like AI strategy and business strategy are really one and the same. They're sort of interchangeable now. So to think of them as very separate is a little bit misleading. Can we actually launch a poll? I'd love to just get from the attendees. Our first poll is around AI strategy. Excuse me, and where people are at, right? So we're curious to understand of the folks on on the webinar today. Where is, or how well defined is your AI strategy? Do you have that high level executive vision that's really driving it? Is it more defined and maybe progressing at a functional level, like sales, marketing, customer service are doing some things? Is it cross-functional, where you're seeing AI implemented across different teams? Maybe it's product development, marketing, product management, and sales, a couple teams or groups, departments coming together. Or is it really being driven by folks that get how to make this work inside of IT, DevOps, data ops, data science teams, where certainly a lot of the understanding of the how to do it exists, but maybe not necessarily always the why we should be doing it.
There's somebody wants to know the none of the above choice. we were going to throw that in there, and I think we just left it out. So none of the above. Say more if you have a none of the above. Just let us know in the chat, and maybe it's just not defined. That's possible too, right? A lot of organizations are still trying to figure this stuff out, and many times when the vision is very, very high level, it's very difficult to make that tangible, but it has to be broken down into more specific types of activities, tasks, and tactics.
So we got another comment. There's a lot of talk, but not a clear path of how to get there.
Yeah. They do seem to believe that they need this thing, but there's lack of clarity about what it really means. Here's another one. Companies seem to answer that they have a full strategy and how, but when you drill down, it's the wrong implementation and the solutions were oversold. So you're telling me, Oscar, that you've actually had a technology salesperson sell you something that was not real, or they've actually oversold that? That's hard to believe. Do you know, I think you guys know the answer, you might have heard this one. I've used it. Do you know the difference, Dave? You know this, right? The difference. Well, first of all, how do you know when a software salesperson is lying? You know that one, right? You watch very carefully and you see that their lips are moving, correct? Okay. But how do you tell the difference between a software, I'll put it in AI software salesperson and a used car salesperson?
How?
Well, what's the difference? Sorry, it's not how to tell the difference. What is the difference? The used car salesperson knows when they're lying.
Okay.
At any rate, so the point here is that even when it's defined at a high level, it can be very ambiguous. It can be very challenging to make that specific and to act on it.
Okay, so thank you for participating in that first poll. Let's move into data quality, information architecture. So we think we know here at EIS some of the key components of making AI work from an IA and data perspective. But Seth, as you were writing the book and doing research on some of the critical factors, what did you hear from some of the folks you interviewed? What did your research produce? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And, I'm also reading Tanya's comment here. Solutions are provided, but the infrastructure is not in place to support the findings that AI and ML can provide. That's a very, very good point. And I think it also speaks to this data issue, right? Because one of the challenges is that, when you spend time building out an AI solution, usually you start in some type of a prototype or POC or sandbox type of an environment. And when you do that, what do you have? You have this luxury, this wonderful luxury of working on the data, getting the data right, making sure it's the right data, making sure it's completely filled in and it's accurate and it's aligned with the process and all of this, right? And they say that data architects or data scientists spend more time being data janitors in these types of initiatives, right? So you get this great environment, it's in a POC, it's a sandbox, you're able to work on the data and get it right, and this works really well. And then what happens when you deploy? You don't have that data. You don't have it. It's not the production. You don't have production quality data that you had when you were able to do this in the sandbox, right? The production data is not there. It's not sufficient. It's not the same. And even going from a POC to production, the parameters change and the environment changes, and there's a lot of other things that need to happen. So many times things will work out okay in a pilot or POC, but then when we go to deployment, that's a problem, right? So scaling these things are very, very difficult. And again, it's part of it is saying, do we have the right architecture, right? Do we have the right structure for our data? Because when you start thinking about things like cognitive assistance, chatbots are a channel, and it's a channel to data and content and knowledge. And that data, content, and knowledge has to be structured in a way that can be retrieved. So not having the right knowledge architecture, the right information architecture means you can't get that stuff, right? And so much time gets spent preparing that content and that data for these cognitive assistants. in a way that's not going to be sustainable. So when you think about cognitive AI, as we said, it reduces the cognitive load on the human, but training those things requires the same thing you need to train a human, right? You need high quality knowledge assets. Back in the day when IBM was building Watson to play Jeopardy, the misconception was, oh, you just point your AI to all the data and it figures it out, right? Well, they found that if they pointed to certain sources, their performance significantly declined. And so they needed to be very careful about how they were curating the sources of information for that. And your organizations need to do the same things, right? Many times what we're trying to do with AI, machine learning, is we're trying to make up for our past sins in poor data hygiene and poor content hygiene, right? We're trying to, use semantic search, or we're trying to use classification algorithms, or trying to use knowledge graphs to try to get to this information that was not well curated in the first place. And there's no free lunch, right? Where the tools can help us get there more quickly, but we still have to be able to have that right data and that right content. And one of the ways to think about this, I had a slide that I skipped over, but these are information retrieval mechanisms, just like search is an information retrieval mechanism. And the difference between plain old search and a cognitive assistant or a virtual assistant, or whatever you want to call it, is the sophistication of the tools and the experience, but also the quality and the structure of the data and the content and the information. So what we have found is that, there's a lot of great deal of expectations around what these tools can do. And yet there's a lack of complete understanding of what needs to be in place for them to be effective. And so what you start seeing organizations do is they have content operations that are kind of distributed through the organization in different silos. And then they bolt on content operations for cognitive assistance. Well, that's not going to work, right? Because it's going to further fragment that information landscape and that knowledge landscape. What we need to centralize those content operations and those knowledge operations, centralize standards and processes and methodologies and technologies and architectures and knowledge graphs, and ontologies. And then we need to be able to distribute that content creation, knowledge creation, and curation. But it can't just be distributed. And so the knowledge graph and the ontology are super, super important when it comes to that.
One thing I actually had not seen these stats until just a little while ago. I have not seen data quality, data health as a category with such high level of investment, probably ever.
Yeah.
And I've been sort of in the business of data quality management for many years, so I've had a chance. And the data literacy and data catalog, also I think understanding, right? So to me, those are categories of tools that help to define and educate people on the right uses of managing, organizing the data, but also interpreting and using or analyzing the data. So interesting that these categories are growing, and there's a lot of investment there. I think, right? It's indicative of a broader trend of companies getting more serious. Of course, you can say, well, they're buying the tools or investing in solutions, but are they actually seeing real benefit? And we want to talk more about benefits in a minute. What I want to see, or actually ask you right now, is you talked about ontologies. It's on the front cover of the AI Power Enterprise book. We have long and I think very important philosophical conversations on the differences between taxonomies and ontologies.
Yes.
Ontologies being sort of the real sort of progression towards a true semantic representation of your business. Can you talk a little bit more about what ontologies are in the context of powering AI applications?
I can indeed. And I, in fact, created a couple of slides for this because I find, by the way, an interesting comment that I believe it was Dominic had, was that the data platform, data lake investment basically means throw it in there and we'll figure it out later. And the data lake becomes a data swamp. So that's a very astute point, is that's what people are thinking is, oh, we can just put it in there and figure it out later. Well, you can figure it out later if you have this data infrastructure, this ontology, this semantic structure. So what does that mean? And what's so interesting is, I was at a workshop the other day where someone was saying, they were talking about taxonomy management and they were talking about ontology management. And they looked at them as separate things. They're saying, I said, well, wait a minute, isn't taxonomy management subsumed into ontology management? And they actually said no. And I was like, what? That's not the way I look at this. So taxonomies are building blocks, right? And I'm going to give you some short definitions just to make it simple, right? Taxonomy. It's a list of terms that help you classify things. It's subject, topic, parent, child, hierarchical. It's like an isness. This is, Massachusetts is part of the United States. Boston is in Massachusetts, right? Parent, child, whole part relationship. We then have another structure that we add on to our taxonomy, which is a thesaurus structure, which means we have other terms that could be also used to represent the same concepts. So proposal may be the same as SOW, may be the same as statement of work. Now, it could be different, but SOW and statement of work could be what are called non-preferred terms, where, maybe the preferred term is proposal, the non-preferred term is SOW. Again, some organizations look at them differently, but the idea is that we have the ability to take the variations in how people talk about things and the terms they use and map those together, right? Because that's a big problem around search. Oh, wait a minute, I'm looking for SOWs. Well, wait a minute, we tagged everything with statement of work, right? So I can't find it. So that's what we need to do. But then there's another really, really powerful thing in a thesaurus. That is the see also relationship. Think of it in the back of the book index where it says see also, or you go to a reference librarian and they say, oh, you want a book about this particular topic? Well, look over there in this section because there's great books on that topic, but you wouldn't have thought of it because it's a related term. It's a see also. You should see this because you're also interested in this. Here's a reason why. But it's a very specific reason why. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But it's like, here are our products. Well, you might want to see also our services, right? So products and services, those are two separate vocabularies, but there's a relationship between them. That's where we start getting into ontology. So an ontology consists of all the vocabularies, all the hierarchies that describe a domain of information, the domain of knowledge, right? In a life sciences firm, it's going to be drugs and diseases and indications and mechanisms of action and generic drugs and chemical compounds and drug targets and so on. In an insurance company, it's going to be products and services and risks and regions. And then you have relationships, like here's the indication for this disease, or here's the risks in this region, or here's the products, or here's the services around this product, whatever it might be. And then the ontology really collects all those things together with all of the relationships between them. So this is where we relate our taxonomy. So taxonomies and thesaurus structures are components of that. Now, I'm going to show you examples of this in just a moment. But when we think about the ontology, it becomes the semantic framework. It becomes the knowledge scaffolding, right? And you can layer everything onto that scaffolding. And then when you have that scaffolding as an access point to the data, that becomes a knowledge graph, right? The knowledge graph is the ontology and the data. And it allows you to have different access points to that data so that you can surface it in various contexts. You can say, I want to see all the proposals for this type of organization. And now I want to also see the sales that we've had with them. And then I also want to see the subject matter experts who are involved in those sales. And then I want to see, the various products. And then from those products, I want to understand related products or the services. So you can start to navigate across this complex world of information. And here's how this will start to look, right? So this is an industrial distributor. So we have different names of industrial distributors, Fastenal, Grainger, MSC, Wolseley. We have departments within those. These are the vocabularies. We have document types, we have products, customers, interests, industries, processes, environments, tasks, roles. Those are all the vocabularies in my domain, okay? So these are all taxonomies. Now, let's look at this. this is my ontology, because what do I have? And I didn't describe these relationships, but I have the hierarchical, which is the parent-child whole part relationship I just described, the subject and topic, right? And then I have the equivalence terms, which is the thesaurus structure. Again, it didn't define that, but that's what that is, an equivalence term. And again, equivalence terms could also be the technical terms. It could be acronyms. It could be code names for projects. It could be brand name. It could be all sorts of things, right? It's the equivalence term. IBM is Big Blue is International Business Machines, right? Then we have all these associative relationships. So what products are appropriate for these industries? What environments are part of these industries? What document types go with these products? What tasks with these document types and so on? And we build this as a knowledge graph. This is what it looks like. I have customers and I have certain roles. I have processes that these customers care about. I have products that are used in these processes. I have products that these customers want. I have documentation for these products. I have customers that are in a particular industry. And this becomes, again, that knowledge scaffolding and those entry points. So again, taxonomies are the list of terminology and the relationships. The thesaurus structures are taxonomies on steroids because it contains the related terms and the equivalence terms, right? The non-preferred terms. And then the ontology are all of those things together and the relationships. And the knowledge graph becomes that ontology structure with access to the data. This is powerful. This is incredibly powerful. This can be used for all sorts of things. You can have customer data models in here. You have content models in here. You have product data models. You have marketing asset models. You have all sorts of things. And then you have the ability to be able to drive many, many processes. Personalization, chatbots, any type of configuration, e-commerce, all sorts of initiatives can be built on the knowledge graph. It is an incredibly powerful structure. And you have the ability to do things like faceted retrieval, personalization. You have the relationship between all of those different processes. You have the ability to surface information for different roles and be able to solve very specific problems or ask very specific questions around things like supply chain management. You can surface the right content and the right attributes for different roles once you start associating those roles with their interests and with the attributes. And again, we can use this to help to further disambiguate and power search, because we can take in other signals, right? The search is not just about the term and the content, it's also about the context of the user, right? So there's a lot of power here.
Okay, so now we know a little bit more about what it takes to build the foundation. But building the foundation, if we're building taxonomies, ontologies, and rolling out knowledge graph solutions, and enhancing our data quality chops, that's all an investment in people, time, whatever the resources are, probably some money. How would you think companies should start looking at that investment? And I think we want to actually launch with a poll here around, if you're looking at AI or maybe some of the foundational components of AI, what are the return on investment benefits that you're trying to convince others to help support that? Is it about revenue generation, saving and reducing costs, maybe containing costs, so optimizing what you're doing more with the same level of expenditure, increasing customer satisfaction and experience, maybe just improving brand equity and excellence, mitigating risks, something else? We start with these because generally, these are sort of the highest level benefits that anybody in the C-suite understands.
And I do want to increasing efficiency. Great. And sometimes that can be cost savings or cost containment, but increasing efficiency, as Paul mentioned. John has a good question here. Should a business have different taxonomies and ontology if they're part of the business? So here's the answer to that. Having an enterprise information architecture and consistent taxonomies for the organization does not mean that everybody has to have the same thing, but you will be intentional about the differences. right? Certain things do need to be consistent, right? We don't want to have different sets of product categorization structures, right? We may have different products, but we also have different divisions, but the product should be looked at in the same way across divisions, right? Customer attributes. We really don't want to have a different way of describing a customer from one organization to another. They may look at them differently, right? They may care about different things, but that attribute model should be consistent, right? They may care about different things. Like one part of the business may care about consumer customers and the other is business to business customers. But what we want to do, and you will have a lot of variation in terms of the things that a business cares about, especially large, diverse organizations. And we will have differences. We don't have one grand galactic Uber taxonomy. We have multiple taxonomies. And then and they may be at different levels of granularity, but we also want to be intentional about the differences. We don't want to have haphazard differences. We don't want to just accidental differences. We don't want to have people do things in two separate silos and not talk to one another. They may not be the same, but we'll be intentional about it not being the same. And that's where governance comes in and is so important.
Yeah. So want to leave a few minutes for questions at the end here. Can we talk a little bit about how to measure?
Yes. And I do want to make
investment.
Yes, and I do want to make a mention of domain-driven models, ontologies, cross-link, not one model to rule them all, but they should be connected. That's Frederick. Thank you for that. That's a great point. And the other mention here, Megan talked about site hyper-personalization. That is a fantastic application for AI and machine learning, and we need to have that right architecture behind that. So thank you for those. So let's talk about ROI. Again, let me just go in here and grab one of my slides here. So here's this is one of the graphics that we had. Let me go back and share. So this was talking about how a lot of organizations are having trouble getting tangible value, right? And why is this? I think the problem is that we're not instrumented, right? We're not necessarily looking at how we connect these things. And many times the investment, and some of you may have seen this, we call this our metrics layer cake. Some of you have seen this before where, we're saying, well, how do we increase revenue, reduce costs, whatever it might be. However, sometimes we're working in the weeds, right? Sometimes it's a data investment, right? It's remediation, it's data quality, it's data architecture. But we can measure at this level. We can have data scorecards, content scorecards. We can have metrics around search, but that is not something that's going to produce a direct ROI, right? So this is one of the problems, is many times we're working at a data or a tool level and we can't measure that ROI. However, we can have baseline metrics here. We want to have baselines so we can show that things are improving. We do have the ability, though, to look at how the data and the content and the knowledge and those assets support a process. And there we have process scorecards. And how do we impact the process? And the process, of course, is supporting a business objective. What objective? Is it customer satisfaction? Is it repeat business? Is it likely to recommend? Is it total wallet share? This is where I like to say people get bonused, or as I attribute to Chris Penn, there's a resume generating event, right? So that's an important area, these business outcomes. And then, of course, the business objective has to align with the enterprise strategy, which is whatever it is, improving recurring revenue. There'll be lots of different business outcomes. The critical piece is the linkage, right? We need to have that linkage and we need to establish that. We need to tie that together. So this is where organizations are having challenges. They try to measure these things, but we really have to measure, those other pieces that contribute to that ROI. Right. And even going from this level, the first level, to the second level can be very challenging. And there are other levels that you can do as well. Now, you can also take this and you can apply it across every stage of the customer journey, right? We can say, let's look at that journey and let's start looking at, well, who's responsible for those stages for that journey? What are the processes at each stage of the journey? What are the accountabilities? And then what are the tools, technologies, and data? And we can have data scorecards. We can have tool health scorecards, deployment scorecards, right? We can measure how well we're doing with the technology. And what we do is we flip that scorecard upside down, that layer cake. We have the data and technology scorecards, we have the process scorecards, and then we have the outcome scorecards. So this can be instrumented across the entire organization. And the critical piece here is understanding those linkages and having those metrics in the instrumentation. Now, this is easier said than done. I have a whole workshop on instrumenting metrics throughout the customer journey that we could, do on site for you at some point. But the point here is that this is how we need to think about these things. This is how we need to try to measure this stuff.
So I think we have time for one more poll. We do want to ask our audience about tracking. So with that, can you help us understand where you're at, in terms of tracking your own investments? Are you collecting the data necessary to start measuring? Maybe you have the data, but are not necessarily seeing or showing meaningful improvement. Maybe you are showing some value, but not enough to justify more spend. Or maybe you've got everything figured out. You've got a clear ROI. You're going to your management and saying, we've got this, let's keep investing, let's grow investment, and we'll show real value and return.
Yeah, this is interesting. So I do love seeing that there are people that are showing ROI and that's justifying the investment. That's terrific. That's really an ideal place to be, because I like to mention or talk about the excuse case, right? The use case, that's the excuse to do other stuff, right? Where you can justify it. And then once you justify it, you build credibility, then you can do other things, right? But you need that core use case that's going to drive that ROI and give you that justification so that you can continue to get funds. And, it's not difficult to find the excuse case, right? But you need to be careful about it and you need to measure it and you need to build that into the foundation of that program. So interesting.
Okay.
There's data, but not is showing results is not something that people have selected. It's mostly collecting the data. Let's see, it's collecting the data, not collecting the data, and then some are showing value and a few. Surprised that they're collecting data but not showing meaningful results. That's interesting.
Yeah, we've actually seen some clients in recent times have a wealth of data. They're sitting on it, and they're not actually doing anything to really drive actionable change.
Right. Yeah. So that's interesting that we're not seeing that here. So, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, let's leave a couple of minutes for questions before we conclude.
Sure. And I do want to leave a couple of things for people to think about. Oops, I'm sorry why this didn't build correctly. Sorry about that. But the question really is, what is the problem you're trying to solve, right? What are you trying to solve and what's that impact? And you want to think about how's the organization to act on information that they're getting from these programs? Where are you getting the data, right? Is it the right quality? Are you going to be able to scale these things? Asking these kinds of questions are really important. How do you address the data issues? Are you clear about the process? Do you know what aspects you can improve? And then who's going to own it? Who's going to fund it? Who's going to be impacted? And then are you clear about those expected capabilities? And again, these are the kinds of questions that you really want to talk about and you really want to ask up front. So any thoughts, questions, comments, concerns? Would love to hear you. Please enter them into the chat or Q&A. Let's see. There's a little bit of a discussion here on languages. So I guess one of the questions that's come up is, what are people seeing in terms of low-hanging fruit in terms of cognitive AI? And the cognitive AI, again, those are kind of the knowledge retrieval pieces, right? Cognitive, when people talk about cognitive computing, as I mentioned before, it's not, there's no cognition, right? It's really about helping people make decisions. So it's really kind of usability on steroids. But we've seen, knowledge retrieval bots, right? Helper bots, the ability to get information in a conversational manner, either text chat or through some kind of a voice interaction. But many times those are very valuable for the people who are serving the customer, who are supporting the customers. So we can see a lot of improvement in things like time per incident and first call resolution. And it's really a knowledge problem, right? It's really thinking about that from that knowledge perspective. And, I had another slide that talked about, and maybe I can just pause this for one moment and go back to that very quickly. This was a slide that we talked. This was one that we talked about. We were starting to talk about this before. Let me resume this. So this is kind of looking at these cognitive assistants, and you want to think of these from the perspective of the task and complexity, and then the domain complexity. And there's a continuum. You have transaction support, knowledge retrieval, and judgment-based types of applications. So this is the where's my stuff, information, status. That's the low-hanging fruit, right? Then you can get into product configuration. You can also have a complex domain with a simple task, like life sciences might fall into that. And then you start getting into product support and then complex advisory and diagnosis. And the whole idea is don't start there, right? Don't try to start with a high complexity domain, high complexity task, in a customer facing environment, but you can build transaction bots, configuration bots, and knowledge bots, the whole spectrum. These are a great starting point for organizations doing this kind of work. And it does justify a knowledge architecture, and you can build on this, and you can build very powerful virtual assistants. I do want to give you one last thing to think about here. And I will kind of leave you with this. And this is, if you guys are, oops, do we have that? Here it is. Okay, if you guys would like some help, here's our pitch. We have an offering in terms of a readiness and AI readiness assessment. And what we can do is we can educate people. We can kind of get everybody on the same page, build a roadmap, look at the places where you have low-hanging fruit, look at the opportunities. Dave, do you want to speak more about this?
Yeah, well, this is a quick and we think easy way to get started. We'll do all of the heavy lifting, of course. We look across the different dimensions of the people, the organization, business alignment and strategy, as we talked about earlier, data readiness and information and technology architecture. And of course, how to govern and make decisions on investment and change moving forward. And, it gives you definitely a starter plan. We think more than a starter plan to look over the next couple of years. We try to take a 2-year time horizon these days because we think anything beyond that is probably a little bit too unpredictable. But this certainly gives you a better view in terms of where you are compared to others in your industry and maybe other industries, and where to go from there.
Yeah, and even if you're far along the journey, it doesn't matter where you are in the process. If you're farther along the journey, it can still help you get to the next level and assess what you're doing, what's going well, what's working, what can you scale, what are the roadblocks, what are the obstacles, how do you get better return, how do you expand your capabilities and so on. So just something to think about. And with that, I think we have some other resources. So feel free to take a look at those, and always, as usual, feel free to reach out. And I think with that, we're right at the top of the hour. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and thank Sharon for managing, herding the cats as usual, and doing a great job behind the scenes. And Dave, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you all for joining.
You will have the slides, and feel free to reach out. Would love to chat with you and talk shop anytime.
All right. Thanks again.